I've been told that at 4 years old, my mother started teaching me the piano. Piano lessons were very interesting for me, but it wasn't what I wanted. I was much more interested to invent music in the keyboard, but it wasn't what my mother wanted from me. My mother wanted me to practice. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. That's what she wanted. When she wasn't at home, she asked our maid, look, he has to work 1 hour practicing in the piano, and so when I come back, please let me know. She came back, and the maid said, oh, he has been very good. He was over 2 hours practicing. I hadn't practiced a bit. I had been inventing music. I must have been 8 years old when I started going to lessons at the National Conservatory of Music, taking theory and things like that. And I had a real piano teacher at that time. Mother and father took me to concerts, you see, to operas also. I really was in contact with music very much. In a way, you know, if my music is considered as a neoclassicist, I got it from my liking of Stravinsky. For me, Stravinsky became the real god of music in those days. When Stravinsky came to Chile, I couldn't participate in all the festivities that composers had for him because I was sick in bed. My friend Claudio Spies, Chilean composer who befriended Stravinsky, asked his mother to please see that I could meet Stravinsky. Finally, I was with Stravinsky alone, so he said, I have a question. Where did you buy your socks? Of course, he saw my socks because I was with my leg one on top of the other. You see? And I said, well, I bought them. Could you guide me to the shop where you had? I like them. Excuse me, said. And he approached me and touched them. He liked them very much. So our conversation continued about socks, and then it went to ties. He told me that last time he was in Italy, he had bought a number of ties that he likes very much. He liked ties. He changed a tie a day. And well, and our conversation ended that way. We didn't exchange anything about music, his or mine or any other music. When I finished high school, my family asked me, well, now what are you going to study? Meaning, what profession are you going to? And I said, well, I think I have a profession. I want to be a musician. No, they said, that's not a profession. That's a very beautiful liking in your life, but it's not a profession. You won't earn your living with music. Think of something else that you like in the field of, for example, medicine, law, architecture, engineering, and so on. Well, I decided on architecture. I started discovering that architecture and music were very close. and that I was very much interested in many of the aspects of that I studied in architecture, in many courses that were attached to the profession of architecture, were very close to what I thought of music. I worked for 2 years after I received my diploma as an architect, but even before I finished my studies in architecture, I was teaching history of music at the university. One day I decided I don't want any more of this. And I decided I am going to work only in music. The idea that I wasn't going to earn my living with music was not so. I was making more with music than with architecture. So I decided 2 years after I had received my degree and worked as in an office of an architect, I decided no more of this, and I simply left architecture aside. But architecture has been present in my life as a composer constantly. I must have been 20 years old when I started teaching composition. But before I was appointed to teach composition, I got married. I always tell a story that she says that it's not true. We lived very near, and I saw her walking to school, you know, when I was going to the university, and I looked at her and said, oh, that girl I like. I would like to marry her. My sister was a friend of Carmen. And of course, I asked my sister, please invite her someday, you know. I want to talk to her. So that's the way I became acquainted. I was married when we came to Tanglewood. I went to Tanglewood in those days and studied with Copland in Tanglewood first. I met Copland in Chile. My situation with Copland was, first he was Mr. Copland, then he became Maestro, then he became Aaron. I had very interesting schoolmates. Roque Correro, Quinatera, Orbon, outstanding Latin American composers who were working with Copland. I studied with Copland in Tanglewood, and I continued studying with him as a friend. I must be fair, you know, that I owe to Copland as much as I owe to another teacher that I had, that Copland said that I should study with him. That was Randall Thompson. Copland advised me to take lessons with Randall Thompson, especially in choral music, in the composition of choral music. So that same year, when I was a Rockefeller Foundation scholar, I went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia, where he was teaching a course in choral music. And I still believe, you know, that Randall Thompson has been the greatest choral composer that the United States has had. I never feel that I received a great deal of advice in orchestration in Chile. I got it from the United States, from Copeland and Randall Thompson. Jack Harrison came into the story in 1959. I have one of the letters that Jack Harrison wrote about this from the United States, about this project of establishing a center in the United States. And it went through the 60s, and finally it became a reality in 1961. I was contacted by the embassy saying that Mr. Harrison was coming to Santiago and he wanted to see me. And that's when I met him. And that's when he asked me if I would be interested in being the director. That was a purpose of his trip to Chile, to ask me if I would be interested in being the director of a center for the promotion and research of Latin American music. And I said, yes, I would be very much interested. He said, we want to establish it in Washington as part of the OAS. I said, well, I'm sorry to say that I disagree thoroughly with that. The idea of establishing it's very good. I think it should be incorporated into a university. It needs the participation of a faculty interested in this. A faculty that could be initiated in the existence of this music. And said, therefore you think that this center should be part of a university curriculum? Yes, part of the university concern. He agreed, and he said, well, I would communicate your idea to the board of directors. I got a letter from him saying that the idea had been very well enthusiastically received, and that the Rockefeller was going to make a sort of an investigation of schools of music, universities that would be interested in this. And one was Indiana University, and he mentioned that the dean of Indiana University was absolutely flabbergasted and interested in this, and that he had phoned constantly the Rockefeller Foundation saying that he would like to go to New York and have a meeting with the board. I had had a contact with Dean Bain in 1954 when I was in New York. William Schuman was the head of the Juilliard School at that moment. And William Schuman said, well, if you don't want to go back to Chile, I suggest you're getting in contact with Wilfred Bain. He wrote a letter to Bain. Bain wrote me back and offered me a position as a theory teacher. That didn't work, but Dean Bain remained in contact with me, wrote letters, Christmas cards and things like that. Until in 1961, the Rockefeller appears in the landscape of this, and Bain again, you know, becomes a strong supporter and of the idea, and he wanted again to come. And of course, the salary he offered me in those days was a little more attractive, and more attractive than the situation I had had in Chile with the symphony orchestra. I was committed to be in Bloomington September 9th, when the open faculty meeting of the School of Music was going to take place. My wife had rented a house in Wiley Street in Bloomington, very near the School of Music. So on the 9th of September, I walked to the School of Music, and I must confess that I did it very slow because I was frightened to death. Because I had seen the catalog of the School of Music, I had seen the name of Paul Nettle, Menahem Pressler, Joe Gingold, I mean, really big professors. And I was frightened. I thought that they were up-leveling me very far. And I remembered entering the recital hall of the School of Music with great timidity, and there was a tall man there that came to me and embraced me. "This is my friend." That was Wilfred Bain. And from that moment, you know, I felt as everybody in the faculty were friends. It was very nice. There was an enormous amount of visits of Mr. Harrison to Bloomington in those days. I guess that was, I didn't participate very much, that was establishing with the university the way of payment of the grants that they were going to give. This wasn't an organization that was going to last 5 years only. They wanted to be sure that it was going to progress beyond that. I told Dean Bain, research, I think that the center needs to be strongly connected with the musicology department of the School of Music. Promotion should be done on the basis of programs presented at the School of Music. We could think of festivals or isolated programs of a selection of good Latin American music. And this, then to interest in teachers of instrument and voice in the repertory of Latin American music. Because they don't teach Latin American music to the students, because they don't know Latin American music. I remember that Bain asked me, well, and how would you call this? Latin American Department of Music? No, I wouldn't call it department. Perhaps Latin American Center. Oh, I like that. Latin American Music Center. Yes, that's it. And there we decided, you see, that that's what we were going to call this organization. And that's the way it became finally part of Indiana University School of Music. Once that the center was established, the first thing I did, first of all, I requested from the university the appointment of a secretary to help me in the work that should be done. Then I thought, well, a center like this needs to know who are the persons that it's going to serve in Latin America. And we have to establish contact with them. It's not enough to say that you are a Brazilian composer. We want to see the works of a Brazilian composer. So I established sort of questionnaires to composers, to musicologists from Latin America, and distribute them broadly in to every country of Latin America. We wanted to know not only that Camargo Guarnieri was a Brazilian composer, we wanted to know Camargo Guarnieri's life, we wanted to know Camargo Guarnieri's music, and etc., and start building up an archive of composers of music critics, of musicologists in Latin America. Musicologists that were interested or engaged in making research in folk music, in art music, in indigenous music, and so on. So that was the first thing to establish. I think that the Latin American Music Center has contributed to sort of broaden the panorama of music in Latin America in the knowledge of, within the knowledge of American people. In Latin America, the reflections of the center has been, I think that it's more psychological, mainly psychological. Composers, even young composers, they feel that they belong to an activity which is not only confined to the small size of their own countries, and even sometimes even smaller than that has extended geographically in the Americas. Not 1 year of my stay as a director, I avoided teaching a course on Latin American music, and especially sometimes addressed to the development of our own school of music. Why did I teach a course, for example, on vocal music in Latin America? Because I knew of how important the development of opera, of voice training was in the School of Music. So in a way, I opened the doors to a repertory that went beyond the French and Italian and German repertory of music to the students, and I would guess to the teachers also. It was very surprising to see that what I had dreamt gradually became true. When I was engaged by the Rockefeller Foundation and Indiana University to come here for a year, I never thought beyond a year this. I dreamt with it beyond a year. But I didn't know, you see, that this was going to extend the way it extended. First of all, I didn't know the School of Music of Indiana University. I knew that it was a very important school of music. But I was surprised, not only by the friendship of my colleagues in the faculty, but by the way things were done here. The important that all genres of music were part of the education, and that my duty as a director of this new department within the School of Music was to extend this to the field of the Latin American countries.